Hey everybody, here's this Agile thing. I am Matt Beam.
And I am Mike Markey.
Hello, Mr. Markey.
Hello, Mr. Beam. How have you been?
I've been great. It's it's that time of year.
The time of greatness?
Well, that's technically all year. It's spring. It's close.
It's
Close to
well, we're
spring.
officially into March. We're at the entry into March, where it traditionally does the lion thing. Did you happen to check the forecast for today?
Somebody told me we're going to get 25 inches of snow, and then it didn't do like literally nothing. No precipitation.
It certainly hasn't done it yet. There is a massive mushroom cloud of weather hovering beneath us. But the thing that caught
sounds
my eye
ominous.
this morning was the forecast for thunder snow ones.
I
Which,
have seen that. It is confusing and magnificent
Yeah.
at the same time.
So I'm hoping we're going to get some noisy snow.
It's entertaining as hell. So this week we're going to talk about a topic called TameFlow.
TameFlow.
TameFlow. This comes from a gentleman called named Steve Tendon. I won't go into his background. You can look him up, obviously, on the internet. It's interesting. He's got a decades-long history in software, and part of his career, I think, if I recall, was required him to understand and evaluate the effectiveness of different organizations in terms of their software development skills for certain purposes where it was important that you got it right. So he spent decades understanding what works and what doesn't work and how to fix it.
That sounds very consultanty.
It is quite consultanty. Yes, yes.
Okay.
And TameFlow is a big subject. It's kind of like Disneyland, as we were saying in the pre-show. So we're not going to get through the whole thing. It's not going to be comprehensive at all. I want to basically stick a flag in the ground and say, like Disneyland, here's a place that exists. There are many kingdoms. They're all worthy of exploration. It's going to take a while. Right?
And so at this point, to go back to our weather analogy, we're expecting a light dusting, possibly with a little bit of lightning.
But
So
not
we'll
a
see.
ton of depth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
That's safe.
No, it's not safe.
It's
not.
not
It's
safe.
not safe.
It's quite different and possibly not safe. So it's heavily built on the theory of constraints. So he utilizes Goldrat's work, obviously, and Little's law is in there. He uses the flow metric stuff at the team level. The first thing I think he would recommend you do is use the flow metrics to establish throughput and understand what are the wait times versus the touch times at the team level, and look at item aging to understand what's taking a long time and establish service level expectations and an agreement with the business that if there is a problem with something taking too long or prioritization problems, that the executives or somebody will come in and resolve that for the team quickly to keep it moving, essentially, right? To keep the flow moving. TameFlow, I think, is safe to say it's based on theory of constraints, lean, flow.
Got a bit of Kanban in there.
Kanban is definitely used. Yes, he's taking a bunch of stuff and putting it together. The reason it's called TameFlow is because he identifies 4 different flows that you need to keep an eye on. Financial flow. Are you going to write this down?
Oh well, no, I've got the notes, but you've got the financial flow. No, actually, so I wanted to go like tame, like why
Yeah.
tame? Is this taming the? Is he talking about getting a hold of the flow to be able to control the flow? That's
Precisely.
the tame part. Because when you first start, you're going, he calls it tame flow, and this is why. Here's 4 things, and the first letter you use didn't start with T, and I just
It's
immediately
not a
went,
manam.
yeah,
It's not a nama. It doesn't. The
Amina
initials
mana?
don't stand for things.
not a word.
Correct. Thank you. So yeah, financial flow, operational flow, informational flow, and psychological flow. And so just real quickly, I'll sketch out. Financial flow means how much wealth are we creating?
Mm-hmm.
Operational flow is how well are we delivering? Informational flow is how well are you communicating? And psychological flow is how happy are your people? That's sort of the way to think about all 4. And I thought about this. I was like, because when I very first came across this, I was like, well, that seems a little, I don't want to say gimmicky, but I didn't understand it, right? And why are these 4 flows canonical or essential, right? And then you think about it, actually, can you really have an effective software development organization where you don't have health in all four of those areas? I don't think you could. It makes sense, right? Are there any flows missing, you think, or how does that strike you?
I mean, the ones that I like to think about is basically how much work are we doing? How soon can we get it? How good is what we're doing? And how happy are we? Which, so there's a bit of psychological flow in there. There's definitely a bit of I don't know, the operational flow is certainly there. Financial is,
Right, exactly. It's like, so this is one of the things that really struck my fancy, having been a coach for a while. I mean, an actual coach, but like one of the issues or the concerns I had as a coach was at the team level, the lack of awareness of the financial impact of what the team was doing, right? We would estimate a bunch of stories and we would say, well, deliver 50 stories at the end of this sprint, but the connection between the 50 story points and what's different for the customer, what's different for the business in terms of more money or less money or anything else, reduce risk, it wasn't super clear. The connections weren't, and so that's one of the explicit connections he's making here is using throughput accounting instead of cost accounting, which is a whole other show, I'm sure, at some point. But I think high level, he would say, from Goldratt, the goal is to make more money today and in the future.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a way to talk about that with precision and rigor in terms of how your activities today are going to lead to that outcome, you don't really have an effective software development organization yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, for financial flow, it seems like he's taking into account both sides of the equation, just the flow of the flow out of your money to keep things running compared to the flow in of what you're, how quickly you're able to earn back on that.
Yep.
Which I thought was pretty, it wasn't something I'd actually seen articulated before.
You see suggestions of it in these other scaling frameworks, but he comes right out and says, you need to have, here's the equation. It's in the book of TameFlow. Here's the equation, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you are a math lover, you will find a lot of maths. He's got all the maths, all the best maths.
Yes. Everybody says so.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any particular part of this you want to delve into.
Well, so I mean, if you start at the beginning, we're talking a lot about flow, and the only reason I would say, unless there's something specific we want to dig into on flow right away, since we recently did kind of a flow metrics discussion, there's the thing in here about mental models, and the statement of the mental models that actually intrigued me was, it doesn't really matter what else is going on in the organization. It's the way your CEO thinks that matters the most, which we cynically might think that, but again, not a lot of people say it. So
yeah, unity of purpose is a thing that he talks about a lot, right? And because without it, it's easy to see why, right? You might have departments where, the classic example is the developers are incentivized to push more stuff out, right? So if their number goes up in terms of throughput, they get more bonuses, let's say, for example.
Okay.
Testing could be a different department, right? And they're incentivized to find defects. So the more defects they find, the more their bonus is, right? So right there, you don't have a unity of purpose, right? If they're both maximizing their individual incentives, they're at war. Right, so the system as a whole is not optimized. They don't have unity of purpose, and so that's why I think that's why he talks about the mental models. He explicitly says, "Look, it's the leader's purpose. You need the leaders to make sure that the people in the organization are using the right mental models for the organization. Right? People have to be understanding the problem the same way. They have to be thinking about their approach in the same way, right? So that they're all. This is not like rocket surgery, but like we all have to be rowing in the same direction." It's either rocket science or brain surgery. It's higher level, so we have to put them.
There you go.
So we won't be going in the same direction without unity of purpose through the clear mental models.
I've actually seen an organization where the cross purposes of that development and testing was actually in play, where developers got negatively impacted if bugs were found in their code. And the testers were positively or were negatively impacted if they didn't find bugs.
So it's not theoretical. Like this is happening.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
what
And
was that like? What was the experience like there? Because you worked there.
It caused friction between. We had a heck of a time getting unity in that team at first, right? And as with any system where you measure things, eventually the team discovered a way to game the system. And the way to game the system was to know where have the developers point out where some bugs were, but not so many bugs that it would raise an alarm.
So the system found homeostasis or stability, right? But you weren't exactly getting the optimum.
No, it was obviously operating at cross purposes, and why would you want to keep doing that to people? So anyway, to go back to the concept of bringing the mental model to bear that fits, like, is there something more you can say on that?
So I would say some of the most powerful examples of the mental models, like the one that jumps out to me is throughput accounting versus cost accounting. And that's the thing we've talked about on the show before. Mm-hmm. I think he starts with that in the book because so much, it's so foundational, right? So you're using theory of constraints, broadly speaking, to say across this system, let's say there's multiple teams in the system, right? And theory of constraints would tell you, find the slowest part of the system, the constraint, right? The part of the system there that is slowest, or like the part that's keeping the rest of the system from going faster.
Yeah.
Right. And scale down the commitment of all the other parts to match that so that you don't have excess work in process. Right, because the work in process creates multitasking. Like it's complicated because everything's connected to everything else. But in order to do this, you have to be willing to tolerate knowledge workers not being 100% utilized.
Yeah,
no kidding. This I can hear the brain, like not to make fun of anybody or but the mental model of 100% utilization from cost accounting will prevent you from doing this. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You would look at all that idle time and somebody is going to get acid ingestion about that. But it isn't even always from the leadership. It's not even always from project management. The members of the team themselves start getting twitchy if they're idle too long.
Well, they probably spent their entire careers where if you didn't look like you were busy on something, somebody was going to notice and it wasn't going to be necessarily good for you.
Yeah.
Because of the mental model that person had.
Ah, yeah. So, the concept of measuring what you're producing or measuring how much production you're able to get out of that. Some of the like Little's Law and things like that. I'm always fascinated by the concept, right? That you're going to derive a formula from these two variables that's going to be meaningful in some way. And my brain never makes the leap to look at that and go, yes, I get it. Right. I'm accepting wait time times active time, something like that.
I don't know. It's in the notes. I'm not a math guy.
As two numbers multiplied together, but then looking at that going, what? Why would you like if you multiply those two aspects together?
So
what does that prove? What is that proving?
So one of the things that was interesting to me is like the notion of stop me if you've heard this before, right? You're in a large organization. They're trying to do software at scale. The way they do that is they take the whole project and they shove it into their mouth and they start chewing on the entire thing at one time, right? And whip goes through the roof. Mm-hmm. Multitasking goes nuts. People end up coming to these meetings and they can't remember, are they talking about this thing or this other thing or whatever, right?
And why are we wasting time still talking about this thing? We've spent a half hour on this and we still have all that other stuff.
And by the way, I just heard from the VP of whatever, and now we have to drop this and do this other thing because, so this is provable mathematically with using Little's Law, which is why I went there. But like, the metaphor he uses, Mr. Tendon, is like, let's say you go to, let's go back to Disneyland, right? Let's say you're at some Disneyland ride, right? Mm-hmm. And the way that those people run the ride is not, 500 people have showed up at 9 a.m., right, to run this ride. Let's try to pack everybody onto the ride, right? We'll put them all into the process. Because, see, you could think of like the system where stuff is actively being worked, right? So people are writing code, they're testing code, they're doing design, like they're actively working. Stuff has been pulled from the backlog into a sprint or in progress, right? That's like when a person gets onto the ride, right? They're being touched. It's touch time, right? It's happening. Disneyland knows that you might have a queue of people lined up, but if you try to shove them all into the process at the same time, nobody likes that. That's not worth paying for, right? It's the same model, and Little's law lets you see that it's the equivalent. Like the same law explains the experience in both places, right? Because you've got a queue of people, and you've got a process, you've got an entry and an exit, right? And the math holds up across those. The stuff that this is why he talks about mental models. The stuff we intuitively understand when we go to Disneyland or McDonald's, right? You're going to stand in line. And nobody's working on your thing yet. Like nobody's committed to your burger or to your ride. But when you get to the ingestion point, that's when you say what you want, and then there's a little bit of touch time, and then you get processed, and then you leave. Right? That thing of delaying commitment, delaying start of the work, right? And then because you don't wait an hour for your burger, you wait a couple of minutes, right? The ride is not an hour long; it's a few minutes, right? The actual touch time is small. Because that's how you efficiently move people through that system. You let them wait until you're ready to commit. I don't remember how we started talking about that, but
I don't know. But every time we talk about rides at Disneyland, I think of the counterpoint of that, and that was getting on the blue line at rush hour, where the platform is full of people, and every time a train comes by, it's already full, and people are trying to smash their way into the train. Right? Like Disney could be that if they didn't make things, because there's enough people. There's certainly enough people.
that sounds like another valid example of Little's law in action. Like if you try to do the opposite, how many people are happy within that moment when they're getting shoved in like sardines?
I'm pretty sure no one was happy with
Everybody hates it, but we don't recognize the pattern everywhere, like in big time software development. It's fascinating. It's super interesting to look at it.
There is definitely cool stuff there. Yeah. All right. So what next? What next would we delve into in this?
Well, we talked about the mental model so that to have the same understanding, right? Using the theory of constraints is super interesting. So, but before that, we might talk about full kitting.
Okay. Let's talk about full kitting. That's beyond where I got. So you would have to explain the full kitting.
Okay, let's do this. So the idea is, what would be the analogy? So you have the full kit of everything you need. What you want to avoid is bringing work in and then realizing you don't have something, right? Okay. You don't have the person that you need. You don't have the interaction design, whatever. So the work starts and then it stops. That's what we're trying to avoid. Okay. So the analogy to this is like, let's say you're in big room planning for SAFe, right? You've got a series of epics or features or whatever. And you say, essentially, to do this big chunk of work, in TameFlow, it's called a move, a minimum outcome value effort. So minimum effort for the outcome or the value, whatever. It could be financial. It could be some change to the business. But to do this whole complete package of work, do you have everything you need to get it from start to finish? Or can you see how it would be available real time so that you wouldn't stop you? This is called full kitting, making sure you have the full kit. Again, if you don't have it, don't start the work, because the worst thing you can do is bring in the work and start it and then realize you have to go talk to someone and everything stops.
Okay. Now this isn't a foreign concept.
No, not at all.
In Scrum, we'll say things like we want to build teams with all the skills necessary to deliver the work that they're taking on. We put guardrails in place to have teams try to recognize that they're ready to work on that a story is ready for them, or a backlog item is ready for them to take it on. So I think it's another branding around a concept that is familiar
Yes.
Okay.
I was thinking about, is this, I'm sure it must be explicitly talked about in other scaling architectures.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember specifically. I'm sure people will tell us if we ever get feedback from this show.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is coming. You'll get that in a Six Sigma kind of environment too. Like something like, why would you start producing something on the line if you don't have the parts to build it?
This one makes sense intuitively. Totally agreed. Yeah, so maybe there's not a ton to talk about in terms of full kitting.
Well, it's neat. It's neat that it's part of, because I see it all the time. Is that teams will think they've got what they need and they get started on something and then they realize, either through design or misadventure, they discover that there's a gap, and suddenly something goes into a wait column.
It's a well-known anti-pattern where, again, this kind of talks about, or it reminds me of Marty Kagan's 4 product risks, right? Is something, so when somebody comes along with an idea to build something, right? I think what Marty would say, he's written this actually, you need to get the people together to talk about, do you know what's valuable to the user? Do you know what's usable to the user? Do you know what's viable for the business, right? Can we make money doing it? And is it feasible from an architectural point of view? Like a real common anti-pattern is you have one or more of those people who can represent those questions missing. And so you don't recognize that you don't have the architecture, or you don't know what the interaction design needs to be to make it useful, or we could do it, but it financially doesn't make sense, or nobody wants it. Right. And, just getting the idea and going with it, as opposed to having those, Mr. Tendon would call this full kitting, I think, addressing those 4 questions up front before anybody does anything.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds useful.
Yeah. If you leave it out, I don't think your system works. So you can see why it's a big book, but it's full of stuff like that. Like, yeah, you need that too.
Yeah. The capacity, the system capacity stuff looked pretty interesting too. Like building in, it's like you're building in buffers into your estimates. But it's
not into the estimate, actually, because we don't do estimates. But yes, buffers are very important.
Well, but okay, what is it a buffer of? What is a percentage of? It's
Time.
not an estimate. Like there still has to be a goal end date, something. Use some expression of when we expect to see this thing done, which will then have a protective capacity buffer on, just to make sure that, because things shift and things change and stuff happens. So we, in the normal, and even with the straight productive capacity value, it's almost like even that has some variance built into it. Like we expect that things will shift back and forth within reason, and that would still be a green light thing that would not trigger any concern. But if you delve into that protective capacity, now you're in yellow mode, right? Now it's something like, let's put some attention on this. Let's not panic. We're not at panic yet, right? But we're not going to stick our heads in the sand and ignore that there's something there.
If we don't do something, we're at risk of having the system constraint run dry, right? The entire system, because the constraint is the thing that runs out first, and so if you go past the protective capacity, past the excess capacity, the whole system will stop. So that's why, yeah. But
So
the purpose of the buffer is to absorb that variability.
Yeah. So it still seems to me though that you've got, because the whole notion behind this was that it was getting rid of status, right? You didn't need to status things that are in the green. They're moving. And this was at the epic level. This wasn't at the story level. This was more, right?
Yeah.
As over time we've got this big chunk of things, so it would be, features in a PI, or collections of functionality that we're going to put together. And
Or moves. He would call them moves.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you would call them moves. So when you still got to have some notion of how big the work is to encase it in a buffer, that would trigger at some point.
Intuitively, you would think that, except remember you're using flow metrics at the team level.
Okay.
So I think what you're doing is you're just right-sizing stories, and you are putting those into a backlog, and you're saying, here's all the stuff that we need. Here's the minimum effort for the outcome or the value, the move, MOVE, right? And then you're saying, this team does 10 stories. We're kind of even away from Scrum. You don't even really need time boxes, so you're not really even necessarily doing Scrum. You could say,
Well, he's definitely. I mean, I got the impression that definitely wasn't Scrum based.
Scrum's not part of this, no. Which is another whole interesting part to talk about. Maybe not today, but what you would do is you would say over the next 2 weeks or the next month, this team does 30 stories per month, right? This move is 15 stories or it's 60 stories. And so you've got, again, you're using flow metrics. So you've got a prediction, a probabilistic prediction with a range on it. And essentially what you're doing is you're keeping all of the steps in the value stream network or whatever, right? The series of teams, you're keeping a buffer on all of those so that they're always moving, right? They're never starved. And the rate of acceptance on all the teams it's no faster than the rate on the system constraint, the slowest team. And then nothing ever stops. Throughput goes way the hell up. And it turns out you get more stuff at the end of a quarter or a year than you would have if you tried to eat the whole pizza at once and choked on it the entire time. That's, I think, essentially what he's saying.
And at some point, though, someone's going to look at this, and your mental model is still going to be like the Herbie example, right? So the Herbie example is Boy Scout Herbie on a hike isn't keeping his pack is too heavy, whatever's holding him back, he's not keeping up with the rest of the troop,
right?
And they're passing him up, and it doesn't count if they all don't make it.
Yes.
So, right? So
yes.
So the example is you slow everyone down, you put Herbie at the front of the line, and you let everyone else walk at Herbie's pace. And then when the team starts seeing what's causing that, then they start, say, self-organizing around ways to at least bring up Herbie's pace by absorbing the weight of his pack or whatever it is to bring up the overall flow. And then by theory of constraints, theoretically, another problem could then be revealed, right?
Yes, this is the famous story out of Goldratt's book, The Goal.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is the story that he used. It's a classic story. It's all over TameFlow. It's like the canonical explanation of the theory of constraints. They call it the 5 focusing steps, right?
Okay.
And so yeah, the story is like these. Well, you just gave the story. I'm not going to reiterate it for the audience. They've been listening the entire time.
You might have done a better job, though.
I don't know that that's true. But just to be explicit, step 1 is to identify the constraint. Oh, Herbie he's way back, right, at the end, right? The second step is to exploit the constraint. Some of this language sounds a little bit weird in 2023. But what exploit means is to do everything you can to get the constraints to speed up. Right, so tell Herbie to walk faster. So now you know what the constraint is. What can we do to speed up whatever the slowest part is? I don't know why exploit is the right word for that, but that's what's in the literature.
I don't know. The image that comes to mind, though, is a very carrot stick mentality where the first attempt is to stick.
It's an interesting verb to use in the context of knowledge work, isn't it? Yeah. So speed up the constraint is the second step, whatever you can. Presumably that's not going to be enough.
Right.
So you go to the third step, which is to subordinate the constraint, which is to say everybody else slow down, right, to no faster than Herbie. So don't walk faster than Herbie. So you've got this great big spread of people. Everybody walk at Herbie's pace, right? So in the software analogy or software situation, this means you don't have a lot of excess work in process on the other teams if one of your teams is Herbie, right?
Yeah.
So that's third, subordinate the constraint. Fourth is to elevate the constraint, right? Which means do what you can to to take the load off the constraint. So in the story, everybody takes a piece of Herbie's gear to make his load lighter and help him to speed up, right?
Yeah.
And then when you do that, presumably Herbie speeds up, and maybe he's still the system constraint, right? In which case you've done everything that you can, and the system is going as fast as it can. Or once you've elevated the constraint, you've made it fast enough, he speeds up, and somebody else becomes the slowest thing. In which case, step 5 is repeat.
Find the new constraint. The new constraint gets, everyone is throttled by that. So there's an inherent, so there's this inherent discomfort with the system being constrained, it seems. So if one of your buffers is filling up, or one of your team members is falling behind, or one of your teams is falling behind, depending on what scope you're looking at, when everything else has to slow down to meet that rate, it generates discomfort in the system, the feeling of lost capacity.
Right.
And
feeling.
Right. So we know that there's going to be plenty of people from the outside looking in getting uncomfortable about that, but I think what we've seen is that you'll see that same discomfort within the team itself. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to leverage that. When we put these cross-functional teams together, say even in a Scrum team, and we say you guys should be working together to achieve the sprint goal, which basically means do whatever it takes to get this stuff forward. Don't let Herbie hold everything up, right? Yeah. If Herbie is holding, if you're not finishing work because of Herbie, why did you let that happen, right? So we hope that we're building that good behavior, and I do mean it as good behavior. I don't think it's meant as people are singling each other out for
Yeah.
It's really identifying who has the need and what can we do to help bring that forward, to elevate it, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I will.
And then and do that. So I think there's something there, and I think we've seen evidence of it in operation in just with the teams that we've worked with.
100%. Yeah, it's the idea of mobbing or ensemble programming, right? Mm-hmm. Where, because what you tend to see in places with the old mental models of cost accounting is at the Scrum team, it's so weird. It permeates everywhere into every single part of and subcomponent of the organization, including how individual team members on a Scrum team conduct themselves in the sprint, right? You, on the one hand, you've got this model of ensemble programming where you take one story in and you have all the brains on the team focus on the same problem. You work on it in real time. So there's no multitasking. There's no waiting to hear back from somebody, right? And you solve a problem. You get it to done, whatever done. And then you're done. And you move on to the next thing. And places that...
and repeat.
And right? You repeat.
And you're going to go through at the rate of throughput of the mob, of the ensemble.
Yeah, and at the team level, that leads to things like really rapid learning, right? Really effective. It's a more effective use of the available resources, brain power, right? People's time and attention.
You said the dreaded R word.
I did. Yes, I don't mean to equate people with office chairs, but that's not what typically happens in a large company, right? What happens in the cost accounting infused model is you've got 10 stories for the sprint, and everybody pulls their own story, and everybody pulls, they go do their own individual work, right? And you've got the work in process goes through the roof. Yeah. And do you get more done?
No, you don't. You not only don't get more done, but you've got no cooperation between the teams. Even if somebody asks for help, everyone else is already busy, so there's no one available to give help. So Herbie stays behind, right? Herbie doesn't cross the finish line. Herbie didn't finish. And if anyone else was waiting on Herbie, despite the fact that Herbie was the obvious slow resource on the team, if Joe was the next slowest resource on the team and Joe can't get any help and Joe isn't, then maybe Joe didn't cross the finish line either, right?
100%.
He just got closer to finishing than Herbie did. Right?
And so this is why Mr. Tendon, I think, starts the book with mental models, because when you see it through that lens, it's totally obvious why you'd get those results, right? Until you see it that way, you can go through years of sprint planning and thinking, man, did 50 story points last time. I bet this time we can do 55. What do you say? Can we all just try harder? Let's really try to push it, right? It's the wrong application of effort.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I get it. Every time you go story points, though, then that leads to estimates. Then you say you don't like estimates, and then it's like, so.
Well, I don't like estimates. I don't think we'll be using estimates in 10 years. Like if I think they'll get outcompeted.
I mean, we've debated this in the past. I think estimation is still there. I think it has its purpose at the right time, and it wouldn't adversely affect this. The model could still operate even if you were estimating things.
Maybe it's a definitional issue. Like the idea of is this story the right size is really an estimation question, right?
Yeah.
And so could you split it? Now you're doing estimation. So that would always be true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
All right.
Well, that's 39 minutes, and I feel like we really drained this one.
I don't think it's drained. I think that we've scratched a lot of the surface. I think there's probably more here.
I was being facetious. I think maybe we scratched the surface and then drained the scratch, but there's so much stuff. So, if you're listening to this, maybe give us some feedback. Talk about it. Let us know what part of this you'd like to hear more depth and detail about. But like, we could do a show just in how to calculate throughput accounting, right? Like, how would you make that case for, looking at it from an economic lens?
And then we would make it interesting. Somehow.
Well, that would be, presumably that would be interesting. But
well, in theory, but just
it could be a very dry subject. Yes.
It could be based on some of the things I've seen. It has the danger of getting a little dry.
Yeah, it's difficult because this is so. If you really take this seriously and apply it, it leads to really dramatic different results, right? Which are inherently dramatic and interesting, but it's so cerebral, it's so theory based, it's so much math. It's like it's hard to wrap your head around it, and you need to infuse it with a narrative, because what humans want is a narrative. That's how we understand stuff. That's how we come to take it on and use it. So.
Well, I mean, in any of these things that we look at, I like seeing resonance of what I can observe in the real world, right? So we can see too much simultaneous work impacting teams. We have observed it. And we have talk about it. We have conversations about it. We have talk all the time. So, but we've had conversations, and we can say, there is something to this statement, and there is probably math that backs it up, but it isn't necessarily at the ready. And so if you had something like the TameFlow book, and I'm sure it's covered in other sources as well. It's not all unique to this, but to be able to back it up and say, there, see, look, math. Why is this true? Math.
Yes. Yeah, there's a quote from W. Edwards Deming that I can't remember. I see it quoted a lot, where it's I don't know, I'll screw it up, but to paraphrase, it's like experience without theory doesn't teach you anything, right? It's like you can run these experiments and you can find out, is this hypothesis true? But unless you have a theory to explain like the mechanism of action or why would you see this, you haven't
I would
really
totally
learned.
expect Deming to say that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right up his alley.
Fits your theory of who Deming is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, why? I mean, his reputation precedes him. He had the calculator pretty much there all the time.
He might have known a thing or two.
It's possible. It's possible he is an authority of some sort.
Okay. I think we're about done here. Let us know what you'd want to see in more depth. And
I guess this has been another Agile thing.
I'm Matt Beam.
I'm Mike Markey. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.
Thanks, people.